Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kansas City Public Library's Make, Do, Tell story session. This is session number 1, so you're starting from the beginning, which is a very good place to start as a storyteller. Although actually, when you're learning to tell stories, you'll find that that's not necessarily where you're drawn. So don't get hung up on that. Tip number 1. All right, so I assume that if you're here, you have an interest in stories. And I don't know if you've come as a story listener or a storyteller, but I hope you've come as both, because I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to talk to you about how you can take the story I tell and make it your own, that you can then tell to your family and friends and whoever you can get to listen to you. Sometimes even just the mirror, but that's not the best, because you really need a story listener to be a storyteller. So, main thing to know. Usually when I start telling stories to kids, I ask them, how many of you are storytellers? And maybe 1 or 2 will raise their hand. And then I have to say, okay, come on, really. Have you ever, maybe forgotten to take out the trash when you were supposed to, and now you're in big trouble? But then you think of a story to tell to kind of get yourself out of trouble. Or maybe you and your little brother kind of got into a tussle, and I don't know, when he tried to jump on you, his knee went through the bedroom door, and now you're stuck having to come up with a story between you to get both of you out of trouble. Maybe just stretching a little bit of the truth, maybe leaving out the part how you made him mad, and he was mad righteously, and figuring out some other way to do that. Not saying I know anything about that, but just saying that's a way of telling a story. The thing about it is, story is how we communicate. It's not just how we get ourselves out of trouble, just saying. It's how we communicate. It's in our DNA, honestly. Back when the first people were living in the world, and it was not quite as sophisticated as today, maybe, but you had to worry about tigers. And so now you went out and you actually came back. You got attacked by a tiger, or a tiger was stalking you, or what have you. And you figured out how to get out of that scrape alive. And you come back and you're sitting around the campfire and you tell your story so that everybody else who is a story listener will know something that worked in case they end up face to face with a tiger themselves. So it's how we actually evolved as a species, was because of story. Now, there's all that. Story is also fun, so don't let me take that element away. Fun. And just to prove it, here we go. I want to tell you a story. Now, this is called The Ghost with One Black Eye. And I learned this story by listening to Priscilla Howe tell it. She's a storyteller here in the Kansas City area, actually lives up in Lawrence, but comes down here a lot and tells stories. So I listened to it and I learned it from her. And when I talked to her about using it to tell you all how to tell stories, she told me that she learned it by listening to a friend of hers, who learned it by listening to a friend of his, going on back to the kid who made it up to begin with. So that's how stories work, at least one way. Here we go. The Ghost with One Black Eye. So my brother and his wife bought a house down in the town that I grew up in, down in Southeast Missouri. Big old house. It's where the mayor used to live. So they have just moved into the house that weekend, and they were about to have their first breakfast together that Saturday morning after getting everything put where it's supposed to be. And Heather is in the kitchen, and she's starting to get breakfast ready. The baby's already in the high chair, and the other kids are running in and out of the kitchen, and my brother's off wherever he was. And so anyway, the baby's sitting in her high chair, and she says, "I want my apple juice." And Heather's busy making the breakfast, and she remembered that they were out of apple juice upstairs, but there was some down in the basement. So here comes Luke through the kitchen. She's like, hey, Luke, would you run down to the basement and get the baby some apple juice? Because she's sitting in her high chair, as you know, saying, I want my apple juice. And so Luke's like, sure, Mom, I got this. And down the stairs he goes. Boom, 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 boom. He gets to the bottom of the steps and he starts across the basement floor back to that kind of dark corner where the apple juice is sitting on a shelf. When he looks over, he saw a ghost. And the ghost said, I am the ghost with the one black eye. And Luke, boom, just like that, he is up those stairs and he's like, Mom, I forgot. You told me if I didn't get my room all fixed up and straightened before noon, I was in big trouble. I got to go. And up the stairs he went, and you could hear the door slam upstairs. Bam. Heather just shakes her head. And she says to Delaney, who is in the kitchen now, hey, Delaney, would you go downstairs and get the baby some apple juice? Because the baby's still sitting in her high chair saying, I want my apple juice. And Delaney said, yeah, Mom, I got it. That boy, he's scared of everything. I got this. And so she heads down the basement stairs. Boom, 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 boom. She gets to the bottom of the stairs and she starts across the basement floor to the dark corner in the back where the apple juice is sitting on a shelf. And she just happens to look over and she sees a ghost. And the ghost says, I am the ghost with one black eye. And boom, just like that, Delaney shoots up the stairs and she's like, Mom, I forgot. I have a haircut appointment and I am late already. I got to run. And she flies out the front door slams behind her, boom. And she is on her bike and down the street. Well, just about that time, my brother comes into the kitchen. Sure is smelling good in here, hon. She said, yeah, it is. But the baby is sitting back there in the high chair saying, I want my apple juice. She's like, Ryan, do you mind running down to the basement and getting some apple juice? Because we're out up here. And Ryan says, sure. And he heads down the steps. Boom, 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 boom. He gets to the bottom of the steps and he starts across to that back corner where it's kind of dark, where the apple juice is sitting on the shelf. When he looks over, he saw the ghost. And the ghost said, I am the ghost with the one black eye. And just like that, Ryan shoots up the stairs and he's like, oh, hon, I just had the best idea for my novel that I've had in so long. I've got to go write it down before I forget. And that's what writers do when it's true. So he was out through the kitchen and you heard, bam, the study door shutting. Well, I don't know, about this point, maybe you've heard this from your own mother before. I certainly did from mine. Heather says she put the eggs on the back of the burner of the stove and said, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. Because the baby's still sitting back in her high chair saying, I want my apple juice. So Heather goes down the basement steps. Boom, 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 boom. She gets to the bottom of the steps and she starts across the basement floor back to that dark corner where the apple juice is sitting on the shelf. And she looks over and she saw the ghost. And the ghost said, I am the ghost with one black eye. Boom, just like that, Heather shoots up the stairs. And she's like, oh my goodness, I could smell the eggs burning, which were on the back of the stove, not on a hot burner. And she grabbed them up and started scraping the pan and mixing them around. Well, Avon, the baby, is ready for her apple juice. And so she kind of does the same thing that her mama just did and says, I want my apple juice. I'll get it myself. And she climbs down out of her high chair and she starts across the kitchen floor. And she gets to the basement steps and she starts down. Boom, 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 boom. She gets to the bottom of the steps and she starts across the basement floor back to that dark corner where the apple juice is sitting on the shelf, and she looks over. She saw the ghost. And she said, the ghost said, I am the ghost with the one black eye. And Avon looked up at that ghost and she said, you're going to be the ghost with two black eyes if I don't get my apple juice. And that's the story of the ghost with one black eye. So when I've told this story before, every time someone raises their hand and said, is that a true story? And I usually don't say, but you guys are here because you're storytellers. And so I'm going to tell you, parts of it are true, and parts of it are made up, and parts of it are kind of a mix of the two. So my brother and sister-in-law did buy a house in the town where I grew up, down in Southeast Missouri, and it is a big old house, and the mayor did live there. But they have never talked about any ghost in their house. And I don't know if that's because they're too afraid what people will think if they talk about ghosts, or if it's because the baby got rid of those ghosts. Because after she threatened that ghost, it was gone. Or maybe there weren't any ghosts at all. I don't know. And then the other piece about that is Ryan is my brother and Heather is my sister-in-law. And they have two kids, two girls, Delaney and Mara, who did not appear in this story. My brother Jeff, he has two kids, Luke and Avon. So I just smushed them all together and made my story. And I left Mara out because she's older now. And yeah, it used to be Delaney was the baby, but then along came Avon. So now she's the baby. So anyway, that is what I got for you as far as the story goes. What I would encourage you to do is think about, how do you see the story? I've heard it told this way, and this is the main way I've heard it told, but there's also a slightly different version. And I'm going to give you some links for these so you can see what the script looks like, and you can even look. I'm actually going to include a video of Priscilla telling the story, and then another guy who tells it, and you can decide what you think about the story or what you learn from each of them. And then I will include a print script so you can look at that as well. But getting back to my main point here is there's a very large difference in this same story of the ghost with one black eye, but it takes place in a hotel, and some guy is in a hotel room and he dies, and then the story comes from that, not a house with the family. It's everyone who comes and gets haunted. So I'll include both of those, and you can think about it. You can think about if you come up with a completely different idea about where it's set. Those kinds of things are decisions that storytellers make as we make the stories our own. And really, when I think about it, stories for me, they come up from inside. A lot of people will say, hey, here's a formula. Make your story like this. The hero's journey is a formula, and you'll hear about that if you haven't already. It's the hero, life is going well, then something happens, and then they have to leave their community and go off on this adventure, and it's hard, and most people on the hero's journey didn't want to go at all, and then they meet a wise person and blah, blah, blah. So that's the formula. But one of my teachers, Doug Lippman, he's like, stories are more like a rose. They grow, and they grow from a seed, and there's no way that you can just say, here's what a rose looks like, and paste it all together and have a real rose. It's like you have to plant the seed and you have to nurture it, which by nurturing it, you have to tell it. And mainly you have to tell it to somebody who is listening to you. And until you get the story the way you want it to be, you still have to tell it and have someone listen to you, and you watch them. And you learn what they respond to, what's funny to them, or what moves them if it's not a funny story. So the last thing I want to say about this story in particular, why it's such a good story. A, it's funny. I haven't noticed anybody yet who didn't laugh at this story and wasn't a little surprised by the ending. But what makes it a great story for beginning tellers to start with is that it goes in a circle. And you probably noticed that. And I'm guessing if I could have seen you watching, you would have been telling right along with me when we did, I want my apple juice, or down the stairs, boom, 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 boom. And make sure you have the same number every time, or someone will know somebody skipped a step. Someone will always notice. And then don't worry about it. If they do, if you did it wrong, that's the other thing I love about stories is if you forget something, you can even just say, oh yeah, and what I forgot to tell you, or what you didn't know. Meanwhile, this was going on, you can slip it in. Never stop in the middle of the story and say, oh, dang it, I forgot. Just kind of keep, moving on your feet and seeing what elements come to you and shift that in until you get there. One time I completely forgot the next line and I'm sitting there. And really what happened was it was the perfect place for a really long pause. And then the words came back to me and I kept on going. That was a little scary, but we made it. And the audience is like, oh my God, that was so good. So anyway, I think that's about all I have about stories for you today. I will post the links in down below the video. And then I simply want to say, find somebody to tell this story to. And then if they want to tell it to you, listen to them. And then you tell it back until you start to get a sense of the story, until you own it. And then just start sharing it with anyone. I mean, you can tell it like I'm doing on video. You can Zoom. Your parents, you need to ask them if that's okay. You can call somebody up and tell them, because we all know we're not supposed to be getting too close to people right now, but we still need the connection, and stories give us that connection. So the other thing I want to say is that the library is full of stories, and you know that, but the library is closed right now. However, we have a couple of things where you can find stories online at our library. It's a database that we pay for it so that you don't have to. And you can listen to stories, you can read stories, and one of them is called Hoopla. The other is called Overdrive. Now, Hoopla, the nice thing about it right now, especially, is that anybody can check out anything in Hoopla all at the same time. So if I want to watch the same thing you're watching, or if I want to read the same thing you're reading, we can both have it at the same time. In Overdrive, it has to be available, just like a library book on a shelf has to be there for you to check it out. But it has all kinds of great stories as well. So between those two things, some good stories. And then the nice thing about traditional storytelling is lots of stories are available online. Not through the library site. So I'm gonna, like I told you before, I'll put those on. All right. I hope that you will tune in next week to get, or the next story that I'm going to give you, so that you can add to your repertoire and start to build it until you can just tell stories and stories and stories like for hours. That's our goal here. In the meantime, on Wednesdays, same channel, basically, maybe a different playlist, but Miss Samantha will be teaching kids how to draw comics. And what you could do is come on Tuesdays and learn a new story, and then on Wednesdays you can go and learn how to draw it, which is another form of storytelling. And then on Thursdays, Miss Kaisha will be on this channel to talk to you about how you can make stuff from things that you have at home. So some of it's sciencey, some of it's artsy, some of it's maybe a combination of both, because they have common elements. All right, signing out. Have a great day. Learn to tell stories and tell them to whomever you can get to listen to you. Bye now.